Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, fellow shareholders. My name is Ivan Anderson, and I've been asked to chair today's function in person as our chairman, Mr. Charles Paradis, who is joining via Zoom, is overseas. It is my pleasure to extend to you, our shareholders, a very warm welcome to our second annual general meeting since your company was listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange last year. Unfortunately, this year's AGM is again very different, given the restrictions imposed as a result of the impact of the coronavirus, and it makes it not possible to have all our shareholders present with us in person. As you may recall, when we met at last year's AGM, we as shareholders passed a special resolution to have the company's Articles of Association amended to allow for meetings of this nature to be held. And as we had promised, we're keeping our word to continue to have as many of our shareholders present in person with us, despite the amendment. I would also like to specially acknowledge our shareholders and invitees who are participating online. Please be advised also that the meeting is being recorded. Please allow me at this time to introduce to you, in addition to myself, members of the Board of Directors who are present in person, Mr. Alok Jan and Mrs. Suzanne Garrick-Brown, our Company Secretary. And the directors present via our online platform are Mr. Charles Paradis, Chairman, Mr. Ian Deere, Mrs. Julie Thompson-James. Our director, Mr. John Mitchell, is overseas and is unable to be with us today. Members of our management team who are also here present with us today are, as I mentioned, Suzanne Garrick-Brown, who is our Admin and Finance Manager, and Mr. Melbourne Lincook, our Senior Quality and Maintenance Planning Engineer. We'll now invite Mrs. Garrick-Brown to offer a word of prayer.
Good morning again, everyone, and thank you, Chairman. Okay, so let's bow our heads for prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for today and for the many blessings you continuously bestow upon us. We thank you for the opportunity to meet once again to discuss our company's business. We thank you that though there are persons here, for the persons that are here that are joining us and for those that are joining us online, bless each and every shareholder and meet them at their point of need this morning, Father. We thank you for the leadership and management of our company and pray for your continuous blessing on the Highway 2000 East-West team as we continue to do our best in serving our commuters and each other. We ask that you govern today's meeting and let everything be done to your glory. In your Son's name we pray, amen.
Thank you, Suzanne, for that prayer. Before we start, I'd like to also personally thank the other members of the team here with us, Mrs. Claudia Thompson and Mr. Kareem Fraser, for their assistance in enabling us to have this AGM today. I've been advised by the Company Secretary, Mrs. Garrick-Brown, that in accordance with the company's Articles of Association, a quorum is present. The quorum requirement is 3 shareholders shareholders present in person or by proxy. I now declare the annual general meeting open and duly constituted. I've been advised also that by the company secretary that there is one apology for absence, which I mentioned earlier, Mr. Mitchell Bell, who is unfortunately unable to join us today. We also wish to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Kayan Sudlow from our partner and Ms. Caris Lewis, audit manager of Ernst & Young, the company's external auditors. Along with them, the Jamaica Central Security Depository, our registrar and transfer agent, who are represented by Ms. Alicia Dean and Ms. Karine Hewitt. I would now like to introduce the chairman of the board of TGH, Mr. Charles Paradis, who has been the chairman of TGH for more than 15 years and who led the company through the restructuring and reorganization, to give his opening remarks. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ivan. Dear shareholders, I'm pleased on behalf of our board to welcome you to TGH's 20th annual general meeting here at the Jamaica Pegasus Hotel. On behalf of the board, let me thank you most sincerely for your continuing support for the company following the largest share offer in Jamaican history last year. This year marks 20 years since TransJamaican Highway Limited was formed and 18 years since we commenced our operation with the opening of our first toll plaza at our Vineyards location. That was back in 2003. Up until 2019, starting from our first full year of operation in 2004, the traffic on our highway has grown by an average of 12% per annum. This track record of growth was temporarily interrupted last year with the pandemic and the health and safety measures associated with it. The necessary measures taken by the government to try to stop the spread of this virus have weighed on the movement of people, which has resulted in a drop in the number of transactions on our motorway. At the worst of the pandemic, in April last year, the downturn in traffic was 52%, but the decrease in traffic has ameliorated over the year, so that by December last year, the traffic for the full year of 2020 was down by only 14.8%. Compared with 2019. Despite these challenges, TGH continues to make all its debt service payments to its bondholders without drawing any funds from its reserve accounts. And the board was able to approve the payment of dividends of 7.48 cents per stock unit in December 2020. This dividend payment resulted in a dividend yield on the TGH stock in 2020 being the second highest of all companies traded on the main market of the Jamaican Stock Exchange for 2020. We are also optimistic that with a decreasing number of COVID cases, conditions will continue to improve all over 2021. This is evidenced by the fact that for the first 5 months of this year to the end of May 2021, traffic is up 12% over last year. And just for the month of May, traffic is up 42% compared to last year. The continuation of this trend, however, remains highly dependent on any new measures that the government of Jamaica could still take in the coming months against the pandemic. As we look into the future, we continue to be focused on the new opportunities which are presenting themselves to us, like owning and operating the future section of Highway 2000 East-West, the so-called Phase 1C, which represent 28 kilometers currently under construction between Maypen and Williamsfield, or the addition of new access onto the highway. We will come back to that later in the presentation. Once again, we wish to take this opportunity to say thank you to our shareholders who continue to partner with us. Without you, none of this would be possible. I now hand over back to Ivan Anderson for conducting this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With this exceptional format, we want to provide all our shareholders with the opportunity to be able to hear, see, and participate in the proceedings of the meeting. We take this opportunity to remind our shareholders who are participating online that, as stated in the notice and explanatory circular provided for this meeting, that questions may be asked by emailing them to tjhighway@h2k-tjh.com. We'll dedicate a half an hour for a question and answer session later in the meeting. Please note also that questions that are not answered during the meeting will be responded to subsequently. The notice of the meeting and the form of proxy were dispatched to all shareholders on record as at April 30th, 2021. In accordance with the company's articles of incorporation, if there is no objection, I propose that the notice of the meeting be taken as read. May I have a mover for this resolution? Mr. Staple, seconded by Mr. Bloomfield. All in favor of this resolution? The ayes have it. The motion is carried. The purpose of this annual general meeting is to seek the approval of shareholders for the respective resolutions outlined in the notice. The resolutions are duly set out in the notice of the AGM dated the 20th of April 2021 and duly signed by the company secretary. The following are the items on the agenda. The first item of ordinary business is the adoption of the audited financial statements for the year ended December 31, 2020, together with the reports of the directors and auditors thereon. Second item is to ratify the interim dividend payments and declare them final. The third is to elect directors. The fourth item is to fix and approve the remuneration of the directors. And the last item of business is the appointment of the auditors, Ernst & Young, and that the board be allowed to fix the auditor's remuneration. Now we will conduct the business of the meeting as set forth in the notice. Again, in order to conduct an orderly meeting and give all eligible shareholders an opportunity to participate, we will follow the procedures as mentioned earlier. Questions and comments from the floor should pertain to the items of the notice, and I ask that persons in attendance wishing to speak to raise your hand, and you will be provided with the microphone where you will state your name and status as a shareholder for the minutes. In accordance with Article 179 of the company's Articles of Incorporation, the company is obliged to lay before this meeting the audited financial statements together with the reports of the directors and auditors, which are contained in the company's annual report for the year ended December 31, 2020. I will now ask Ms. Karen Sudlow from EY to read the auditor's report.
Is that better? Good morning. Okay, perfect. So the reading of the independent auditor's report. To the members of TransJamaican Highway Limited, report on the audit of the financial statements. Opinion. We have audited the financial statements of TransJamaican Highway Limited, the company, which comprise the statement of financial position as at December 31, 2020, the statements of comprehensive loss, income, changes in equity and cash flows for the year then ended, and notes comprising significant accounting policies and other explanatory information. In our opinion, the accompanying financial statements give a true and fair view of the financial position of the company as at December 31, 2020, and of its financial performance and cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS, and the Jamaican Companies Act. Basis for opinion. We conducted our audit in accordance with International Standards on Auditing, ISAs. Our responsibilities under those standards are further described in the auditor's responsibilities for the audit of the financial statements section of our report. We are independent of the company in accordance with the International Ethics Standards Board of Accountants, ISBA, Independent Standards, ISBA Code, and we have fulfilled our other ethical responsibilities in accordance with the ISBA Code. We believe that the audit evidence we have obtained is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our opinion. Key audit matters. Key audit matters are those matters that, in our professional judgment, were of most significance in our audit of the financial statements of the current period. These matters were addressed in the context of our audit of the financial statements as a whole and informing our opinion thereon, and we do not provide a separate opinion on these matters. For each matter below, our description of how our audit addressed the matter is provided in that context. We have fulfilled the responsibilities described in the auditor's responsibilities for the audit of the financial statements section of our report, including in relation to these matters. Accordingly, our audit included the performance of procedures designed to respond to our assessment of the risks of material misstatement of the financial statements. The results of our audit procedures, including the procedures performed to address the matters below, provided the basis for our audit opinion on the accompanying financial statements. On to page 2, the key audit matters continued. Key audit matters, deferred tax assets, recoverability of tax losses carried forward. As discussed in Note 8 and Note 21, at December 31, 2020, a net deferred tax asset of 22.06 million was recorded on the Statement of Financial Position in respect of deferred tax assets of 28.93 million and deferred tax liabilities of 6.87 million. Included in the assets is 26.35 million, representing deferred tax assets in respect of tax losses carried forward and available indefinitely. The company has recognized deferred tax assets related to tax losses to the extent that the realization of the related tax benefits through future taxable profits is probable. The estimate of future taxable profits is based on the strategic financial plan, which requires the management and the board of directors to exercise significant judgments in determining assumptions of forecasts of future taxable profits, including expectations for future revenue developments, traffic projections, as well as overall macroeconomic conditions. The recognition of deferred tax assets is therefore sensitive to changes in the strategic financial plan, as well as to the assumptions made in the estimation of future taxable income. How we have our audit addressed the key audit matters. So as part of our audit procedures, we have obtained an understanding and evaluated the design and implementation of the company's key controls over the recognition and measurement of deferred tax assets. Involved EY specialists to assess the reasonableness of the key economic assumptions embedded in the strategic financial plan, compared the company's forecasted future taxable income to externally available data and the company's actual historical data and performance, and assessed the sensitivity of the outcomes to reasonably possible changes in assumptions, and evaluated the adequacy of the disclosures in the notes regarding the recognition of deferred tax assets based on unused tax losses. Page 3, key audit matters, intangible assets relating to the service concession agreements, IFRIC 12, and related impairment assessment. Intangible assets accounted for 238.06 million as of December 31, 2020, and accounted for 74% of the total non-current assets. As discussed in Note 4, amortization is charged so as to write off the cost of intangible assets over the period of concession using a projection of traffic on the highway over this period. This projection was reassessed in January 2020 by STEER, an external consultant from the United Kingdom, and further amended at the end of the reporting period to incorporate the projected impact of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. The projection is based on various estimates and assumptions surrounding, among other things, macroeconomic variables and toll road traffic demand. These assumptions can vary in practice, and the actual outcome depends on such factors as population growth and the development of other sections of the highway. The policy of the Board of Directors and management is to update the forecast periodically based on the actual traffic. At the end of the period, management performed an impairment assessment on the intangible assets, which were within the scope of IFRIC 12. The recoverability of these assets was verified through a comparison between the carrying amount and the recoverable amount, being the higher of fair value and value in use. How our audit addressed this key audit matter? As part of our audit procedures, we have obtained an understanding and evaluated the design and implementation of the company's internal control over processes related to the intangible assets, verified the reconciliation of the register to the general ledger values, and completeness and accuracy of the actual traffic data, and recalculated amortization charges for the year. Placed reliance on the internal consultant's traffic projection report over the concession period, and therefore assessed the external consultant's qualifications, that is, professional certification, membership in an appropriate professional body, experience, and reputation in the field. We also assessed the external consultant's objectivity, and with the assistance of EY specialists, evaluated the work performed, including reviewing the assumptions and inputs used in the report in accordance with ISA 620, using the work of an expert. Examined the method adopted by management to identify and assess possible indicators of impairment of the intangible assets with the assistance of EY specialists. Reperformed the impairment assessment and confirmed the company's conclusion that intangible assets were not impaired, and assessed the accuracy and completeness of the disclosures presented in financial statements. Page 4, key audit matters. Provision for heavy repairs. As discussed in Note 4, the provision for highway repairs relate to the estimated costs for scheduled repairs for periods ranging from 7 years to the end of the concession period, based on projections made throughout the duration of the concession. The provision is based on the same estimates and assumptions included in the company's operations and maintenance plan, done biannually for the next 6 semi-annual periods, and reviewed by the company's independent engineer, Arup North America Limited. Actual cash flows will depend on the timing of the maintenance program, based on annual approved budgets, the condition of the highway as determined by ongoing surveys, deterioration, and the phasing of major works to meet these obligations. See Note 16. The process of developing a provision requires management to use judgment, which could inherently be subjective. How our audit addressed this key audit matter? As part of our audit procedures, we have obtained an understanding and evaluated the design and implementation of the company's internal control over provision for heavy repairs processes. Placed reliance on the independent engineer's review of the operations and maintenance plan, and therefore assessed the independent engineer's qualifications, that is, professional certification, membership in an appropriate professional body, experience, and reputation in the field. We also assessed the independent engineer's objectivity and evaluated the work performed, including reviewing the assumptions and inputs used in the report in accordance with ISA 620, using the work of an expert. Recalculated the provision using the applicable measurement inputs and assessed the planned timetable for utilizing the provisions, evaluated the historical accuracy of the provision assessed by management by comparing the actual utilization to the historical provisions made, and assessed the adequacy of the disclosure of provisions made in the financial statements. To page 5, other information included in the annual report. Other information consists of the information included in the company's annual report, other than the financial statements, and our auditor's report thereon. Management is responsible for the other information. The company's annual report is expected to be made available to us after the date of this auditor's report. Our opinion on the financial statements does not cover the other information, and we will not express any form of assurance conclusion thereon. In connection with our audit of the financial statements, our responsibility is to read the other information identified when it becomes available, and in doing so, consider whether the other information is materially inconsistent with the financial statements, or our knowledge obtained in the audit or otherwise appears to be materially misstated. Responsibilities of management and the board of directors for the financial statements. Management is responsible for the preparation of financial statements that give a true and fair view in accordance with IFRS and the Jamaican Companies Act, and for such internal control as management determines is necessary to enable the preparation of financial statements that are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. In preparing the financial statements, management is responsible for assessing the company's ability to continue as a going concern, disclosing as applicable matters related to going concern, and using the going concern basis of accounting unless management either intends to liquidate the company or to cease operations or has no realistic alternative but to do so. The board of directors is responsible for overseeing the company's financial reporting process. Auditors' responsibilities for the audit of the financial statements. Our objectives are to obtain reasonable assurance about whether the financial statements as a whole are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error, and to issue an auditor's report that includes our opinion. Reasonable assurance is a high level of assurance, but it is not a guarantee that an audit conducted in accordance with ISAs will always detect a material misstatement when it exists. Misstatements can arise from fraud or error and are considered material if individually or in the aggregate, they could reasonably be expected to influence the economic decisions of users taken on the basis of these financial statements. Page 6, continuing the auditor's responsibilities for the audit of the financial statements. As part of an audit in accordance with ISAs, we exercise professional judgment and maintain professional skepticism throughout the audit. We also identify and assess the risks of material misstatement of the financial statements, whether due to fraud or error, design and perform audit procedures responsive to those risks, and obtain audit evidence that is sufficient and appropriate to provide a basis for our opinion. The risk of not detecting a material misstatement resulting from fraud is higher than for one resulting from error, as fraud may involve collusion, forgery, intentional omissions, misrepresentations, or the override of internal control. Obtain an understanding of internal control relevant to the audit in order to design audit procedures that are appropriate in the circumstances, but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of the company's internal control. Evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies used and the reasonableness of accounting estimates and the related disclosures made by management. Conclude on the appropriateness of management's use of the going concern basis of accounting, and based on the audit evidence obtained, whether a material misstatement exists related to events or conditions that may cast doubt, significant doubt, on the company's ability to continue as a going concern. If we conclude that a material uncertainty exists, we are required to draw attention in our auditor's report to the related disclosures in the financial statements, or if such disclosures are inadequate, to modify our audit opinion. Our conclusions are based on the audit evidence obtained up to the date of our auditor's report. However, future events or conditions may cause the company to cease to continue as a going concern. Evaluate the overall presentation, structure, and content of the financial statements, including the disclosures and whether the financial statements represent the underlying transactions and events in a manner that presents a true and fair view. We communicate with the Board of Directors regarding, among other matters, the planned scope and timing of the audit and significant audit findings, including any deficiencies in internal control that we identified during our audit. We also provide the Board of Directors with a statement that we have complied with relevant ethical requirements regarding independence, and to communicate with them all relationships and other matters that may reasonably be thought to bear on our independence, and where applicable, related safeguards. Page 7, continuing the auditor's responsibilities. For the matters communicated with the Board of Directors, we determined those matters that were of most significance in the audit of the financial statements of the current period, and therefore the key audit matters. We describe these matters in our auditor's report unless the law or regulation precludes public disclosure about the matter, or when in extremely rare circumstances, we determine that a matter should not be communicated in our report because the adverse consequences of doing so would reasonably be expected to outweigh the public interest benefits of such a communication. Report on additional matters as required by the Jamaican Companies Act. We have obtained all information and explanations which, to the best of our knowledge and belief, were necessary for the purposes of our audit. In our opinion, proper accounting records have been maintained, so far as appears from our examination of those records, and the financial statements, which are in agreement therewith, give the information required by the Jamaican Companies Act in the manner required. The engagement partner on the audit resulting in this independent auditor's report is Kian Sudlow, Ernst & Young Chartered Accountants, Kingston, Jamaica, March 26, 2021.
Thank you, Kian. Further to the presentation of the auditor's report, we'll now have the director's report. This report will be presented by myself along with Mrs. Gertz Brown. The director's report will cover the following areas: major changes that have taken place, impact of COVID-19 on traffic along the highway, our outlook, what we think about the future, the director's report itself looking at in more details at the 2020 results, and following this, we'll have a question and answer session. So as you're aware, up until December of 2019, TransJamaican Highway was owned by 4 major shareholders: Bouygues Travaux Publics, a large French contractor, along with Vinci, and also another large French contractor, IFC, and Proparco. NROC, however, felt that the company could best fully achieve its potential if 2 or 3 things could be done. The first was, how could we lower the interest costs faced by TransJamaica at the time? Second was, how could we create a more broad-based ownership for TransJamaica? And how could we finally improve the attractiveness of the concession agreement to make it more feasible for Jamaicans to participate? That objective started a series of transactions, commencing first with the buyback of the shares of TransJamaica by NROC, the repayment of the existing loans which TransJamaica had at the time, a new bond issue, which was done at the start of last year, and then the IPO, which resulted in March of 2020. As a result of the IPO, 80% of the shares of TransJamaica are owned by the private, were sold to the public and are owned by, obviously, by the private sector. The companies with the 10 largest shareholding are shown. They are NCB and its affiliated companies, JMB, Mawson, ATL, Guardian Life, and Sagicor. The shareholdings of the directors and management are also shown. In 2020, we also issued approximately 2.5 billion preference shares, and the ownership of these preference shares are also shown on the slide. As the chairman indicated, COVID changed everything. Up until 2019, the annual growth rate in traffic, if you look at the 4 years between 2016 and 2019, was about 6% per annum. In 2020, traffic fell from 24.6 million vehicles in 2019 to about 20.6 million vehicles in 2020, a decline of about 14.8% over the entire year. The revenues for TGH, which had normally been growing at about 10% per year between 2016 and 2019, also fell in 2020 from about 53.3 million US in 2019 to about 45.4 million US in 2020. This trend of traffic movements continued into 2021. I'm sorry, if we go back and look at the traffic movements in 2020, this was heavily influenced by the restrictions and lockdowns which were imposed by the government. So for the first 2 months of 2020, we were on target in terms of our traffic growth. Then came COVID in about March of 2020, and the result was decline in traffic, and then we had a further lockdown in April, where we had the quarantines taking place in St. Catherine, and that resulted in a decline of about 50% in our traffic. Fortunately, as the conditions were relaxed, we saw traffic recover. And so after April, traffic continued to recover through May, through June, through to July, and then just about at August, we had another tightening taking place in terms of the curfews, which then caused traffic to fall again. The good news is from this graph is that after October, traffic continued to recover, recovering through October, through November, and by December, by Christmas, we were very close back to 2019 levels. So that trend also continued into 2021, where the traffic growth was being impacted by the lockdown and the containment measures being put in place by the government of Jamaica. So in 2021, we continue to see the same level of decline in traffic, but we continue to also see recovery taking place. So between February and March of this year, we had recovery taking place. And then we had tightening of curfews again in March because of the escalating numbers of COVID cases. That then resulted in a trend back down again in traffic. But again, the good news, since then, the traffic has recovered. And by May of this year, we were about 6% below where we were in 2019. And if the lockdowns continue to ease, then we expect that the traffic will continue to recover. Notwithstanding the impact of COVID, our shares have held up fairly well. When the shares were first offered in March, they were offered at a price of about 141. At the end of December, they were about 130, representing a decline of about 8%. This is against the background of the rest of the market, which has declined by more than 17% between the same period of March to December. So the stock price has actually held up fairly well despite the pandemic. But in 2020, the board approved the payment of dividends of about 7.48 cents per share per stock unit in December. And this dividend payment resulted in a dividend yield on the TGH stock in 2020 being actually the second highest of all the companies which were traded on the main market of the JSE for 2020. Unfortunately, the consequences of the global health crisis continue to be felt some 15 months after the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, which commenced in March of 2020. The various restrictions imposed by the government to contain the spread of the virus are still obviously weighing on travel and therefore on the level of traffic on most of the road network across the globe, not just in Jamaica. Despite the lockdowns, we've seen recovery continue to take place in traffic. And this last quarter, January through March, we saw an actual return to profit in the amount of 0.6 million US compared to a net loss of about 1.5 million in the same period last year. Unfortunately, at present, the continued postponement of the start of the school year and the use of distance learning continues to weigh on the current level of traffic, as does the maintenance of the curfew and the ban on other large gatherings. We continue to be optimistic, though, with the raising of restrictions announced just this week by the Prime Minister and to take effect in July take effect in next month. Notwithstanding the current challenges, we continue to plan for the new projects, the biggest of which is obviously the Maypen to Williamsfield leg of the highway, which is now being constructed. This project, as the chairman mentioned, will add 28 kilometers to our network, more than 50% of our existing network. So it's a big addition to what we currently have in terms of road network. We have completed the tolling strategy for this section of the roadway. We have finalized the traffic studies, updated them for the impacts of COVID, obviously as best as we know them at this point in time. And we estimate that when we open next year, in October of 2022, we are anticipating revenues of the order of about US $7 million in our first year of operation. We continue to work through the toll compatibility issues to make sure that the system on phase 1C will work with our existing phase 1A and 1B. As I mentioned, completion is expected at October of 2022. We are anticipating putting in our final proposal to own and operate phase 1C over the next few days, by the end of June. What about the new opportunities? Where are we going next? For those of you who live out in the western end of the island, probably would recognize this picture. Anybody know where it is? This is actually Mandela Highway. This is looking at the traffic coming out of Kingston, going west in the evening. So a lot of us thought that this problem would have been solved with the widening of Mandela Highway. But unfortunately, it is not solved. And we still have congestion taking place on Mandela in a westbound direction. The impact of what you just saw on Mandela Highway, we expect will only get worse. Because this is actually a slide showing the greater Burn Lodge development. So the orange line is the East-West Highway. Everybody know where I am? Above it is Spanish Town, and below it is Greater Portmore and Portmore. Everybody know where I am? So the highway, this is the East-West Highway going west from Mandela. And this Burn Lodge development is a development planned for about 16,000 units built between just south of the highway, south of Spanish Town. Everybody know where I'm talking about. So of the 16,000 units, we also have a further 1,600 units being built just north of the highway, which should also add to the traffic issues. At Phoenix Park, which is this development just to the east, just to the west of the slide, we have 5,000 houses under construction by Gores. We also have, as I mentioned, 1,615 units, 1,650 units being built just north of the highway in an area called Caymanas, Catherine Estates. So all of these units are going to continue to influence the traffic coming out of Kingston. And a big reason for the traffic coming out of Kingston, that congestion that you saw on Mandela, is the traffic lights at Caymanas. Because as you know, as you come out of Kingston heading towards Spanish Town, you go through these traffic lights at Caymanas. But what if we could find another way to get into Portmore rather than having to go through the lights of Caymanas? What if you could just enter onto the highway going west at Mandela and then exit at Salt Pond Road? So if you're going to Phoenix Park, rather than going through Portmore, you could come along the highway and exit at Salt Pond Road, Dunby Holding Road. Or you could exit at Burn Lodge if you're going to Portmore itself. Or you could exit even further north, even further east, at Grange Lane. So these opportunities, we believe, could create even a win-win situation for traffic coming out of Kingston. So rather than sitting and waiting for more and more congestion to build up on Mandela, we could look at what are the opportunities that present, which could improve the traffic on the highway. Similar opportunities exist as a result of the congestion along the Old Harbour Road. So again, this is the East-West Highway at the bottom in yellow, in orange, and Spanish Town is above it. And this road is Old Harbour Road. So, you know, Old Harbour Road coming into the Old Harbour Road roundabout in Spanish Town, just by the Spanish Town bypass. Everybody know where I am. When you come into Spanish Town along the Old Harbour Road, these circles, these red areas are actually congestion along the Old Harbour Road coming into Spanish Town. So what you have is people coming into Spanish Town along the Old Harbour Road, even those people who want to get onto the toll road through the Spanish Town toll plaza, still have to sit in this congestion coming into Spanish Town. So again, we have analyzed the possibility of introducing a new road, a new connection to the highway at Heartlands Road. And this will allow people coming into coming from west, coming into Spanish Town along Old Harbour Road, not to have to go through that congestion, but to be able to join the highway much earlier. And similarly, in the afternoon, when you're coming the other way, rather than coming again through this congestion, you're now able to exit further up the road and avoid the congestion. So for both of these projects, both along the area associated with the Burn Lodge and areas on Old Harbour Road, we've completed the traffic studies, and the results are, in fact, very encouraging. In order to improve our customer experience, we're also now working with our designers to implement new payment possibilities. So as you know, we currently don't accept credit cards or debit cards or any other form of payment except for cash or tag accounts along the highway. And our anticipation is that as part of the implementation of Phase 1C, we'll be able to implement these new features as part of that extension of the highway. But not only are we looking at the issue of using debit and credit cards, but we are also part of the pilot with the Bank of Jamaica looking at the central bank digital currency using e-wallets, so avoiding the use of cash. And so that pilot we expect will roll out over next year, and we are also part of that pilot as well. Other goals are first to look at how we can increase our tag usage. Obviously, if we can increase our tag usage, then we can significantly reduce the cost of operation. And our goal is over the next 4 years to increase our tag usage from where we are now, which is approximately 40% of our customers using tags, to over 80% of our customers using tags in the next 4 years. This will also have a spin-off effect where we believe that we can also reduce our operating costs associated by operating these plazas. So the idea is as we build out our network, we'll have more tag-only plazas. So those areas that we looked at earlier, those potential new ramps at Saltpond Road, Bernard Lodge Road, Heartland Road, are all anticipated to be cashless, tag-only exits along the highway. And that will obviously significantly impact our costs. And our goal is to reduce our operating costs by over 20% over the next few years. One of the main items mentioned in our customer surveys is the issue of gas stations and shopping along the highway. And we continue to work with Total to build out that new gas station facility. As you know, we opened a facility at Old Harbour last year, and this will be the second such facility we're proposing to do at Portmore. So this is just by the exit going along the Port Henderson Road is where we plan to have this new facility constructed. We're also working on new offers for our commercial customers and frequent users, the modernization of our toll system to make it easier to utilize tags. Currently, we only sell tags at the tag offices at the toll plazas, but our goal is to be able to sell tags anywhere. That requires us to make some modifications to our systems, and we expect that those modifications will be made this year. We continue to expand our discussions with the developers around the highway about how we can build synergy with them in the development of these new schemes. We're also looking to continue to strengthen our marketing activities. So again, most of you by now would have heard the advertisements which have been launched, our frequent user ads, our T-Tag benefits ads campaign, our special 10% online promotions, our new app, T-Tag to Go, upgrading of our sales office, installation of kiosks at the toll plazas, which is something we plan to implement shortly, and the operation of the service station, which was opened last year. Even while facing a pandemic, we've sought to ensure that the required maintenance of the highway continues to be done in order to protect the assets. Unfortunately, we are all too familiar with roads which are not maintained and the impact which that has. So often when you go out, you see us sealing cracks, for example, along the highway, because when we seal cracks, it prevents potholes from forming, it prevents us from having to rehabilitate the roadways. We've done a large amount of crack sealing over the past year. Just over the past few weeks, we've done significant amount of paving, repaving of the roadways on the Portmore leg of the highway. Associated with the repaving, we have also been doing new lane markings along the roadway, upgrading of the toll equipment, replacement of batteries for our solar lights. I don't know if most of you are aware, but all of the lights along the interchanges along the highway are actually solar lights. So we continue to replace lights along the highway. Despite the challenges with fencing, we continue to replace fencing to minimize the impact of goats which come across the highway. And obviously we continue to maintain the signage along the roadway. So what does all this mean in terms of the long term and how we see the long term? So as we indicated, up until 2019, we were pretty much on track in terms of our expected growth in keeping with the IPO projection. So this blue line is what we anticipated would have happened with traffic in 2019, 2020 when we issued our IPO. Up until the start of COVID, obviously, we were right on target. COVID had the impact of reducing the traffic in 2020. But the good news is we've now seen a recovery. And we anticipate, if everything stays as is and we continue to open back up, that by 2022, we should be back to our IPO targets. And then subsequently, with the developments that we anticipate along the highway, we actually expect that by the end of 2036, we'll actually be above our projections included in the IPO forecast by about 7%. For the detailed results and for 2020 and year-to-date numbers, I will now turn over to Suzanne.
That's all right. Thank you, Chairman. All right, so we will be looking at the results for financial year 2020, and we'll look at the comparative year 2019 as well. So for the year 2020, we had a net loss of 1.87 million. This compares to a net profit the previous year of 8.3 million. And as we know, the main factor, we look at the key factors that impacted our performance for 2020. All right. So the key factors being, one, the containment measures that were implemented to combat the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. Two, or the capital restructuring exercise that started in 2019, at the end of 2019, thereabout, and ended in the first quarter of 2020. Next, the amortization of the intangible asset, and fourthly being the major maintenance expenditures. Okay, so we look at the containment measures. So for us, 2020 started on a positive trend. The traffic for the first 2 months, we saw an increase of 2.1% when we looked at the traffic for 2019, which was very positive. Then came COVID in March of 2020, and as you know, the first set of measures were implemented around mid-March 2020, those measures being the closure of schools, physical schools, and schools being held online, the all-island curfew, the work-from-home order for non-essential workers, and of significant impact for us, the lockdown of the parish of St. Catherine, which occurred in April 2020. The company also was impacted when we were implementing the toll increase for year 2020. So, due to the pandemic and the current situation at the time, the decision was taken to delay the toll increase from the annual period of July, and this was delayed until September 2020. On an overall basis, the traffic decline for financial year 2020, when we compare to 2019, was approximately 14.8%. So other key measures being the restructuring exercise, and as I said, that started in December 2019, where we saw the repayment of we had 4 multilateral banks, as the chairman mentioned before. Those banks were repaid in December 2019, and we had a short-term bridge loan from the government and NCB, which facilitated those repayment. That exercise continued into the first quarter of 2020, and during that exercise, the grant which we had from the government was written back to equity. We also had the debt offering and IPO, and where we all became shareholders of TGH. And later in 2020, I believe around between June and September, the preference shares were also offered to the public as well. There was also the private placement issue where secured notes were issued in the amount of 225 million, and this repaid the short-term loans that we took in December 2019 when we repaid the multilateral banks. Another key factor for us is the amortization of the intangibles. And as the auditor was reading the report, you saw that the intangibles it's our right to the concession, or TGH's right to the concession, and it's really the value or the summation of the amounts we would have spent to build the highway, and that is written off piece by piece each year into the P&L. Another key factor for us is maintaining the road, keeping the road in good condition. Despite the pandemic, we were able to conduct 75% of the planned activities. Those activities that were not carried out in 2020 are now being carried out in 2021. So we assure you that the road is being kept in optimum condition at all times. Let's continue now to look at the statement of comprehensive income, where in terms of revenue. So as I said before, 2020 started on a strong note. We had the 2.1% growth in terms of traffic and 4.8% in terms of revenue. And this was a strong indicator for us that the traffic that we had earned or gained during the widening exercise of the Mandela Highway, which occurred, started 2016 and was completed around about March 2019. So those were indicators for us that we were retaining that traffic that was gained during that period. For the next 10 months that followed, however, for 2020, the traffic was significantly impacted by the decline and based on the measures that were implemented throughout that period. And Mr. Anderson had mentioned some of the occurrences throughout those months. On an overall basis, total revenue for the year 2020 was 45.4 million, and was 14.8% when we compare to 2019, where the revenue was 53.3 million, thereabout. For the other gains and losses, so for gains and losses contains for us the income we earn from investing the amounts in the restricted bank accounts, revenue from secondary developments, for example, the gas station at Old Harbor is part of the secondary development for us, and also income from the amortization of the NROC grant. So for the, sorry, you're saying? Oh, okay, continuing. So financial year 2020, other gains was 1.6 million. This was 57.6% below other gains of the previous year of 3.9 million. And this was as a result of, one, the discontinuation of the amortizing grant. So in January 2020, the board passed a decision to write back the grant, and that was done during the first quarter, so that was discontinued. We also had earned lower interest on the funds that we had in investments, and this was due to the market conditions experienced in 2020. This was offset by some gains realized on the revaluation of the JMD, 8% JMD cumulative preference shares at the end of the year. Continuing now with our operating expenses. So operating expenses for TGH consist mainly of the operator's fees, and that's both fixed and variable, the maintenance of the highway, insurance, and other expenses such as bank and utilities. The key increases were the operator fixed fee, which increases partly on the basis of the CPI, both Jamaican and US, and also on the exchange rate, and the amortization of the intangibles, as we mentioned before. In terms of finance costs, our finance costs for the year 2020 was significantly reduced. As you may have recalled, in 2019, last year we mentioned the heavy finance costs that we closed 2019 with, and that was in part because of the breakage fees and other penalties that we paid for the early repayment to the multilateral banks at the end of December. So finance costs for 2020 is merely the cost incurred on the secured notes that we issued in March, and also on the preference share. For taxation, we recognized a deferred tax asset of 613,000 USD, and this impacted this was a contributing factor, or an improvement rather, to the net loss that we had of 1.87 million when compared to 8.3 million for the previous year. We'll now look at the statement of financial position. So in terms of assets, our primary asset is the road network, of course, and that is what we refer to when we speak about the intangible assets. And as I mentioned before, it's our right under the concession agreement where the highway is concerned. We also want to mention that at the end of 2020, we had restricted cash of 51.4 million for 2020. In terms of liabilities, our primary liabilities are our borrowings, and that is, of course, the secured notes that were issued, the cumulative redeemable preference shares, and those are the shares in January where the existing USD preference shares were redeemed, and new 8% JMD cumulative preference shares were issued, and they are now recognized as a liability. We also had, at the beginning of the year, the NROC grant, which we said was written back to equity in the first quarter of 2020. So that grant no longer exists for us. There's also the provision for the renewals, and this is where we make, estimates for the cost, what it will cost us to maintain the the road network, from over the next 7 years, and we also look at the budget all the way back to the end of the concession period. In terms of share capital, we're looking at the equity now in terms of share capital. So we started the year with share capital of 54 million USD. This was reduced, however, and we are now at 27 million because of the redemption of the USD preference shares that were in place up to January of 2020. Those preference shares have now been reissued and converted to the JMD redeemable shares and are now recognized in liabilities. For share equity, we mentioned that between the financial year 2019 and 2020, the net effect of the write-off of the NRAC grant and the dividends that were distributed last year has a positive effect of 20.7 million on our accumulated profit. And we reminded that at the beginning of the year, in the first quarter, 35 million of dividends was distributed to the then shareholders, which are NROC. And at the end of the year, during that fourth quarter, we had a payout of 6.6 million USD to our ordinary shareholders. Okay, so that is the end of my presentation. Thank you. I will now hand back to the chairman for the question and answer session.
Thank you, Suzanne. Before asking for the adoption of the audited financial statements, I now invite the shareholders to comment or ask questions on the audited financial statements, the director's report, or the auditor's report. Questions may be asked in relation to the conduct of the audit, the content of the audit report, and accounting policies adopted by the company. Please address all questions to me, and I ask that again that you please state your name for the record prior to raising your questions and comments. Staple, morning, sir. There's a mic there.
Mr. Chair, good morning to you, the Board of Directors and fellow shareholders. Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Those online, good morning. Mr. Chair, before I ask my questions, I have a few observations I would like to share.
Right.
So with your permission, sir.
Not too long, Mr. Staple, but go ahead.
No. We must give our Creator God thanks for taking us safely to this meeting today and for His many blessings on us all. Our God has been good to us despite the many challenges at work, in our homes, and in our country. He remains our good shepherd who goes after the lost sheep, and when He finds it, brings it home and makes merry. Father God, guide our thoughts and in our deliberations today, and help us to respect each other's inputs. Bless our board of directors, our chairman, our employees, and our shareholders. And Lord, at the end of this meeting, take us safely to our destinations. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Mr. Chair, congratulations to the team who professionally prepared this management discussion and analysis. It has truly given us, as shareholders, a fair insight into the business operations of our company, and one that will enable us to be guided in our future decision-making. Thanks to you, Mr. Anderson, and the professionals behind you or beside you who helped you in achieving what was achieved in 2020. Meetings were all well attended, where professional thoughts were shared amongst our board, audit, and other members. Thanks to you all, members. And I would like for you also to include in your next annual general meeting report performance evaluation of the board in our corporate governance. So for that, just a line item, just a few words that it was done or not done. Mr. Chair, my question. What are senior secured debit notes? Page 12 of the financial statements. What are senior secured debit notes?
Okay, you want to ask the other questions, Mr. Stepper, and we can answer all of them at the same time? Let's go ahead with the rest of the questions, and we'll answer them all at the same time.
Mr. Chairman, page 20. Explain why incremental and allocation costs relate directly to contractual activity. How do these two costs relate to TransJamaica Highway Limited and their onerous loss-making contracts?
Sorry, Mr. Step, could you just repeat that second question? Incremental activity, could you just repeat the second question?
What's that?
Could you just repeat the second question?
I'm saying, explain why incremental and allocation costs relate directly to contractual activity. How do these two costs relate to TransJamaica Highway Limited and their onerous loss-making contracts?
Okay.
Thirdly, third question, page 54. Your concession agreement expired November 21, 2016, but you were given the right to continue receiving this tax incentive. Why are we as shareholders not benefiting from this agreement? The sole shareholder, as at the 21st of January 20, received dividend of $1.30 US per share, while on the 15th of the 12th, 20, only 53 cents US per 1,000 shares was paid to the minority shareholders. 53 cents US per 1,000 shares. This works out to based on my calculation, 0.00053 US. And when you multiply that by 150 Jamaican to 1 US, it works out to 7 cents. I think more or less, Mr. Chair, this could have been better. And lastly, not lastly, but the other question, what accounted for this significant increase in salaries and wages, while statutory deduction remained the same and pension contributions reduced? So, salaries were increased, wages were increased, but the statutory deductions remained the same. Pension contribution was also reduced. Why? Explain why the insurance charge for 2020 increased from 626 million to 1.25 million. From 626,000 to 1.25 million, which is 100%. And lastly, what constitutes significant observable inputs, and what accounted for this increase in borrowing from 148,000 in 2019 to 281.8 million in 2020?
Sorry, Mr. Taper, that last item, which item you're referring to?
The last question?
Yeah, the last question.
What constitutes significant observable inputs? That's on page 63. What constitutes significant observable inputs, and what accounted for this increase in borrowings from 148 million in 2019 to 281 million in 2020?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Staple. All right, so I'll deal with a number of the questions and then I'll ask Suzanne to answer the others. So the senior secured debt is the US $225 million that we borrowed from bondholders last year. The concession agreement didn't expire in 2016. Remember that we have the concession agreement actually goes until 2036. In relation to the dividend payment, as you recall, NROC had made a significant grant to TransJamaica over the years, which by 2019 had amounted to in excess of $100 million. This was a recovery of some of that grant which was made to TransJamaica. The insurance charges, unfortunately this year went.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
the concession
right.
expired in 2016, but you are still getting that benefit.
Sorry,
Why?
the concession agreement
Agreement, yes.
goes until 2036.
2036.
Yes. What? Oh, you're talking about it's not the concession agreement that expired. It's from the government of Jamaica in relation to taxes. Those expired. So
That
when
has to do with the GCT.
well, not in relation to the GCT on the tolls. The GCT on the tolls has continued. That related.
So that continues.
So there's no GCT on tolls. That continues. But in
Okay.
relation to import duties, those are discontinued.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
I was mentioning that in relation to the insurance, unfortunately, our insurance premiums have significantly increased, and that accounts for the change in insurance costs. I'll ask Suzanne to deal with the other question.
Okay. All right, so Mr. Staple, your question, you said
Can you use the microphone, please?
this one works. You're not hearing me? You hearing me any better? No. All right, I'll go. Are you hearing me any better, Mr. Staple?
Yes, yes.
All right, so you asked about why salaries increased and statutory deductions remain the same.
Yes.
And the pension went down.
Yes.
All right, so the salary, regarding the salary, for year 2020, we had a particular contract in place for the then managing director, which was an expatriate contract, and that was just for the year. So you would have seen a higher amount for 2020, and for year 2021, you will see that the salary figures being regularized somewhat. In terms of the statutory deductions, as I said, he was not a resident of Jamaica, and as such, we had an expatriate contract in place. So the statutory deductions would have remained more or less the same for the local staff. In terms of the pension, it's not that the pension was reduced, because pensions would have been paid on the salary earned for year 2020. However, as we report the pension expenditure is in JMD, and so there is some foreign exchange difference. So when you convert that based on the high JMD rate, it appears to be a lower figure. But if you look at the JMD comparison, JMD to JMD, then you will see that the pension is in line with the salaries that were paid.
So although that particular employee, that foreigner,
Right.
he was not paying tax to the government of this country on money earned within this country, then basically.
Based on the nature of the contract, no, he was not residing in Jamaica.
But he was being paid. He was being paid in Jamaican dollars, converted to US.
Yes.
So why shouldn't he not be paying tax then?
Based on the tax rate in place and the treatment.
So based on the tax agreement then, based on the contractual agreement,
Right.
he was freed from paying tax, from money earned within the country.
I would say it was free from paying tax.
But if it's statutory was reduced,
The statutory wasn't reduced. The statutory wasn't reduced. The appropriate statutory taxes were paid, so it wasn't reduced. I wouldn't say it was reduced.
I am of the feeling, based on what I'm seeing, is that he earned Jamaican dollars converted to US, but did not pay statutory deductions. Am I correct?
Not on that contract. Based on the treaty that was in place, not on that contract.
So why did we allow someone to come into work in this country, earning local currency converted to US currency and not paying the
Right.
relevant taxation?
So it's not the individual that we paid in. The contract was not with the individual, it was with the company to provide a particular service.
Something not right, but continue.
And sure, and we can discuss it. As you know, we are at your disposal. We can discuss it further outside the meeting if you wish.
I didn't get that.
No, I said we can speak on it further if you're still not clear.
I'm
but
not
saying,
happy about that. I'm not happy about that.
So right, that's what I'm saying. The contract.
So we'll talk about that after the meeting.
No problem. No problem, Mr. Staple.
All right. Did Mr. Anderson answer the last question? Page 63?
So page 63, you're looking at the 2019 cost that we had of 148 million, which was the short-term loans that were in place at the end of December 2019, compared to the long-term liability figure for 2020. So 2020 would figure is the net of the secured notes that we issued. And so the notes, we took 225 million at the time, which was though higher than the debt. So it included the repayment of that 148. That 225 also covered the distribution that was made in March of 2020. It also, portions of it went into restarting some of the reserve accounts that we need to maintain for those secured notes.
Is it these loans that we are talking about? Does the government of Jamaica has any contact with these loans?
No, the loans are strictly taken or for the benefit, were taken for TransJamaican Highway.
So the government of this country will not be called upon to pay any of this revenue, any of these loans then, basically, if anything should happen?
No, the loans are for TransJamaican and are the responsibility of TransJamaican Highway.
Okay, so whatever happens in TransJamaica Highway then, whatever happens, the government is not going to be called upon to defray any of these expenses.
No.
So
No.
it is totally TransJamaica responsibility.
It is totally TransJamaican Highway's responsibility.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome,
And may
Mr.
you
Stephen.
continue your hard work, Mr. Anderson, and your team. It's difficult, but we understand, and the work must go on. Thank you.
Appreciate your questions. Any other questions? Mr. Bloomfield?
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning, sir.
Lanzel Bloomfield is the name. Mr. Chairman, my first question has to do with an announcement which was made a few years back concerning the North Coast Highway. There was suggestion that the highway would have proceeded all the way through St. Mary, Port Maria in particular, through Georgia, on to Port Antonio. One has not heard anything since concerning the building of that highway. Can you shed some light on that matter? My next question has to do with, you spoke this morning on the installation of the gas station. And I'm therefore asking, will there be charging station for EVs, which we are getting more and more of those vehicles into Jamaica, so as to be able to facilitate motorists using the highways? My third question has to do with, as I travel along the highway by taking the bus, I'm a driver, but I don't currently drive. I notice that when you have incidences of mechanical failure, there are no laybys for motorists to pull over and to rectify their vehicles. What are the plans for the installation of laybys along the various highways? And my last question, if you turn to page 9 of the report, note 20, but at the top, you have revenues of 45 million US dollars. And in note 20, you have an expense of over 31.4 million US dollars. Mr. Chair, when I read this, I feel taken aback because I have to question, why are your expenses of such magnitude for just operating the various highways? And what is going to be done to reduce these expenses? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomfield. So in relation to TransJamaica, just to be clear for everybody, TransJamaica is only responsible for the East-West Highway. So what people used to call Highway 2000. So the highway which starts at Mandela all the way to Maypen, along with the Portmore Causeway. So that 50 kilometers of roadway is what is TransJamaica's highway's responsibility. The North Coast Highway, which runs from Montego Bay through Port Antonio, is obviously not part of TransJamaica Highway's responsibility. That's part of the government of Jamaica's, NAA's responsibility. So we are only responsible for the East-West Highway. And as we have been talking about, we have a right of first refusal for the extension of that East-West Highway, starting from Maypen by the roundabout, going all the way to Williamsfield. So when that extension is completed, then we would have had approximately 78 kilometers of highway under the responsibility of TransJamaica. So we are not able to speak about the North Coast Highway or the North-South Highway. Our responsibility is only in relation to what we call the East-West Highway. The suggestion regarding EV charging stations is a very good one, and we continue to raise it with Total. So the idea is to have more EV charging stations. Yes, and we fully support that suggestion. Unfortunately, we don't encourage stopping along the highway. Stopping along the highway is dangerous. So we don't provide any laybys where you should stop. If you have an emergency and your vehicle breaks down, then we encourage people to pull off of the road onto the grass shoulder. But we maintain 24-hour patrols along the highway. So, and we monitor the time it takes for our wreckers to get there. So the average time for our wreckers to get there is less than 30 minutes. So any vehicle that breaks down along the highway, which is unable to be moved, we ensure is relocated within 30 minutes. Let me ask Suzanne to deal with the issue of the expenses.
Okay, no problem. So you asked, why is it that we have such high fees in terms of operating cost? So if you look at the operating cost, the two major elements are one to the operator, and that is for the operation of all the toll plazas across the Highway 2000 East-West network. And so that is a fixed cost on contract and something that we are aware of. But we are maintaining the highway and operating it at a particular standard, and as such, we have to ensure that though the fee may seem high, it is to provide a good quality service to our commuters, and something that we continuously look at, and we're currently trying to find ways to optimize this cost. Another key item which was mentioned in our presentation is the intangible asset and the write-down. So that is just what we'd call a theoretical figure, has no cash impact, but is recognizing the cost of all the amounts that were put into building this highway and recognizing portions of it throughout the years, throughout the life of the concession, into the profit and loss account. And so and this is done on the basis of the traffic. And so for this year, 2020, that 11.2 million that you see there is the portion that we attributed to the year 2020. And so really it has, in current day, it has no cash impact. So those are the major items. The third one that stands out is the insurance. So I will mention, I think I mentioned it last year. For 2018, 2019, we had managed to secure a 2-year contract in terms of insurance, and which at a reduced rate. However, based on the market conditions, we were forewarned in 2019 that the rates, especially for the Caribbean region, are increasing. There are some insurance companies that are pulling out of the region, and so we have to maintain a certain standard of insurance for the project. So we have no choice. We have to reinsure, and unfortunately for year 2020, this is the cost. It almost doubled somewhat for insurance. You'll see when we do 2021 that we have tried our best to renegotiate and to keep the rate where it is more or less for the 2020 level. David Rose?
Yeah, there was a question which was emailed in. Let me read it. With the world of work undeniably changed forever, this is from David Rose, a shareholder. How does TGH foresee the future prospects compared to pre-COVID-19? So as we discussed, our assessment at this point in time, based on what we know about the restrictions and where we are currently, is that we anticipate that by next year, we should be back to 2019 levels. And subsequently, we are anticipating that the conditions will further improve as we have more and more developments taking place. So as I discussed earlier, by 2036 at the end of the concession, we expect to be approximately 7% above our IPO projections in terms of traffic. Another question: does TGH believe that it will be able to pay some of the discussed dividends as mentioned in the prospectus within the next 2 years? Also, with more cash becoming restricted, what's TGH's position going forward once part of the long-term debt begins to be repaid? So, as we had discussed last year, currently we envisage paying out as much dividends as we can, taking into account the obligations and the projects that we have before us. Currently, the major project that we have before us is a Phase 1C project. When we did the refinancing, some of that cash that we discussed, some of that additional cash has been set aside for the implementation, for the purchase of Phase 1C. And so, subject to those conditions, we expect to pay out as much dividends going forward as we are able to.
A few questions. Just to let you know, Mr. Rose, we will in fact reply to the other questions. So it's quite a few questions, so we will reply to them when we return to our offices. So you will receive emails from us.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead, Mr. Staple.
When will the government of Jamaica take control of the South Coast Highway?
All right, so what is called the South Coast Highway is a project, as indicated, which is being implemented by the government of Jamaica. It's made up of 2 sections. The section which goes from Harborview to Port Antonio, which is being implemented by the NAA, and a section which is being done from Maypen to Williamsfield, which is being implemented by NROC. So
I'm talking about the section between Kingston, okay, not the Kingston, between
Maypen and Williamsfield.
Mandela and Niguel on the south coast there, or to Mandeville, whichever section is it. When will the government of Jamaica take control of that area?
All right, so as we discussed, the TransJamaica section of that roadway goes from Mandela to Maypen currently.
Yes.
And TransJamaica has a concession which continues until 2036. So we have full control over the section from Mandela all the way to Maypen until 2036 when the concession comes to an end. Just to point out that at 2036, we also have an option to extend the concession agreement for an additional 35 years.
35 years.
On top of the 2036. So that would take us to 2071 if that option is exercised. Now the section of road which is being built from Maypen to Williamsfield, which is being built by the government of Jamaica, we have a first right of refusal to purchase that section of road to make it part of our concession. And so that is what we were talking about earlier, that we, by the end of June, have to make our, what is called a first right of refusal, make our proposal in relation to the acquisition of that section of the roadway. So if we are successful in that request, that acquisition, then that would add to the TransJamaica roadways to take it from Mandela all the way to Williamsfield. And that would then become part of the concession agreement until 2036.
So you're saying then from Maypen to Williamsfield, that part of the highway is being constructed by the government of Jamaica.
Yes.
And you will have the right of concession to
Right.
that area, if successful,
Right.
which would add to your Maypen, which would
Exactly.
add to your
Exactly.
Mandela to Maypen. So
Right.
you will now own, if you are successful in your bid,
Right.
you will now own the highway between Mandela and Williamsfield.
That's correct.
But right now, between Maypen and Williamsfield, the government of Jamaica is funding all of that
That's correct.
construction.
That's correct.
But you are in charge of the construction.
No. So the government of Jamaica is funding, managing, implementing the construction. When the project is completed, which we anticipate is at October 2022.
2020?
Next year, October.
Yes.
When the project is completed, TransJamaica Highway has the right of first refusal to own that section of the roadway. So we are presenting a proposal now to own that section of the roadway come October 2022. And if we are successful, then we would pay for that section of the roadway and we would take it over and operate it from 2022 until the end of the concession agreement in 2036.
Okay. So basically then what I'm hearing
Yes.
is that the government of Jamaica
Yes.
is funding the construction
Yes.
of Harborview to whatever section of the
Port Antonio.
Port Antonio, and also from Maypen to Williamsfield.
That's correct.
Thank you very much. Sir.
Any other questions?
Chairman, I have one question which came in. So I don't have the shareholder's name, but a question that was asked regarding the dividend payments which were done in December 2020. Mr. Staple? Are you hearing me? Okay, so I'm just raising a question that was asked on behalf of a shareholder, and his question was, why is it that he received dividends in JMD when he had a USD account? So we just want to use this medium to let our shareholders know that the IPO was intended to be in JMD, and though it facilitated customers purchasing in USD, ultimately it was in JMD. And while we do have cross-listing on the stock exchange, both in JMD and USD, unfortunately, the register that was set up at the stock exchange is only one register that was set up, and it's in JMD. So when the dividends are paid, those persons who have given mandates with US dollar bank accounts do receive the dividends in USD. At this point, there will be some complications into splitting the register to separate the JMD and the USD. To work around it as best as possible, we are asking our shareholders to submit either new mandates or revised mandates, those that do not yet have their bank accounts registered with the stock exchange, to kindly do so. If you wish to receive the dividends in USD, kindly submit USD bank accounts to the stock exchange. The form is on their website. You can fill it in and email it to them, and they will correspond with you further on it. But we are sorry about that. We apologize for those who received in JMD, who had wished to receive it USD, and we ask kindly that you submit mandates to the stock exchange. Right.
Sorry, so just to close on that point, this is for people who purchase their shares in USD we're talking about now. So the dividends were paid per stock unit. So dividends of about 7.48 cents per stock unit were paid. So they weren't paid per thousand, they were paid per stock unit. The calculation is equivalent to the one that you had raised earlier, but it actually works out at 7.48 cents per share. So as we discussed earlier, that 7.48 cents is per the $1.41 that you paid for the shares. So when you look at that dividend yield, as we indicated earlier, that's the highest or the second highest of the entire stock market in Jamaica. So even though the share prices have not been appreciating significantly, the dividend yield is very significant.
All right.
All right, if there are no further questions, we can ask that the audited financial statements for the year ended December 31 and the reports of the directors and auditors be and are hereby adopted. May I have a mover for this resolution? Thank you, Mr. Staple. Seconded. Thank you, Mr. Bloomfield. All in favor of this resolution?
Aye.
All right, ayes have it. The motion is carried. We'll now move to the second item of business, which is to ratify the interim dividend payments and declare them final. That the interim dividends of US 6.6 million or US $0.53 per 1,000 shares paid on December 15, 2020 for the year be and are hereby ratified and declared as final, and that no further dividends be paid in respect of the year under review. May I have a mover? Thank you, Kareem. Seconded by Mr. Bloomfield. All in favor of this resolution? The ayes have it. The motion is carried. Election of directors. We'll now take each of the resolutions as a separate item. First resolution, that Mrs. Julie Thompson James be and is hereby re-elected as a director of the company. May I have a mover? So moved by Mr. Staples, seconded. Suzanne. All in favor of the resolution? Thank you. The resolution is carried. The motion is carried. Second part of the resolution, that Mr. Alok Jan be and is hereby elected as a director of the company. May I have a mover? Thank you, Mr. Staple. Seconded. Thank you, Kareem. All in favor of the resolution? Thank you. Ayes have it. The motion is carried. Remuneration of directors. That the amount included in the audited accounts of the company for the year ended December 31, 2020, as remuneration for their services as directors be and is hereby approved. May I have a mover? Simone Spalding. Seconded. Kareem. All in favor of this resolution? Aye. The motion is carried. Resolution number 4. Sorry. Resolution number 5, that EY, the Chartered Accountants, having agreed to continue in office as auditors, be and hereby appointed auditors of the company to hold office until the next annual general meeting at a remuneration to be agreed by the directors of the company. May I have a mover? Thank you, Roger. Seconded. Thank you, Janet. All in favor of this resolution? Motion is carried. Before we close, are there any other general questions and comments? Use the mic.
Mr. Chair, I would like to say thanks to you and your team for the wonderful work you did during the year. Very challenging, but you did a good job. And I would like to congratulate you and your team and ask that you continue doing the work that you're doing. I would also like to congratulate the auditor, Miss Auditor, for her presentation today, real professional. And I would like to congratulate her and ask her to continue in God's name.
Thank you, Mr. Staple, on behalf of the board and management, and thank you on behalf of our auditors.
Also, Mr. Chair, for what you did today. You were within the protocols. You observed the protocols, and you were able to assist physically with our shareholders coming to a meeting. We appreciate it a lot, and although we did not occupy all the seats that were made available, we thank you very much and ask that you continue to invite us physically to our meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Staple. As we gave the commitment last year that despite the amendment to our articles, which allow it to be online, we took the decision that as many of our shareholders who could attend, we should provide for them. And thank you for coming.
Mr. Staples' point on the salaries. So just to clear it up, Mr. Staple, one key point I should have mentioned is that the contract then for the managing director was not with the individual, but with the company, Bouygues Travel Public at the time. We were paying for the services of the then managing director, and he was an employee of Bouygues Travel Public, where he would have paid taxes fully on the income, direct or indirect, that came to him. And based on the double tax treaty between Jamaica and France, he would pay income there and not here in Jamaica. So he was not a direct employee of TransJamaican Highway. Rather, we had a contract with the company or shareholder that was before. We had a contract with the company to maintain the managing director for another year. So I hope that helps to clear up the point. You're welcome, Mr. Staple.
All right, so if there are no further questions, this ends the formal part of our meeting, which I now declare closed. Ladies and gentlemen, as we formally close this section, thank you all for your attendance and interest, and we look forward to your continued support in the coming year. Please continue to keep safe, and we look forward to welcoming you to our AGM next year. We'd like those of you who are here with us to remain for some light refreshments and to feel free to talk with any of the directors and senior management team that is here with us. Thank you again and have a good day.